Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about 2024's most overrated dynasty assets.
Hike!
When it comes to dynasty leagues, they're all about long-term success. You want to have a dynasty, but getting caught up in the hype can lead to some costly roster mistakes. We want to avoid that recency bias. So Joe and I are going to talk about two players each that we feel are quite overrated based on the recent success in 2024. So, Joe, who do you got for your first one?
Yeah, first player I'm going to go with is tight end Dalton Kincaid of your Buffalo Bills, Steve. And, looking at the Draft Sharks trade value chart here, he's listed as tied with Sam Laporta with a 38 trade value and the third ranked tight end on this list. And, I know you were encouraged by that rookie season. You were calling for that rookie season that he was going to have a solid one. I was skeptical because I was one of the people that are pounding the table. Rookie tight ends just don't perform. But he definitely looked pretty good his rookie year. But then, this year, now he did have an injury, missed a few games, but he had 75 targets, 44 receptions for 448 yards and 2 touchdowns comparatively to his rookie year, where he did play 3 more games. He played 16 total, but he had 91 targets, 73 receptions, 673 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And what I thought was interesting was I really thought the fact that Stephon Diggs had, moved on. He went to the Houston Texans, was off of this offense, some of those vacated targets. I really thought Dalton Kincaid was going to be a bigger part of this offense, but just wasn't necessarily the case. And the Bills, I knew the Bills were going to lean more heavily on the run game because that's just what Joe Brady would like to do. You kind of saw it at the beginning or to the end of last year once he took over, but I just didn't expect the Bills to spread the ball out as much as they are. And I guess it has helped Josh Allen, but really was disappointed in the fact that Kincaid wasn't more of a focal point in the offense. And, even guy like Dawson Knox, who isn't nearly as talented at the tight end position, continually takes targets and opportunities away from him.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I, looking back as far as last year goes and projecting what would happen, like you said, with the departure of Stephon Diggs, you had all those vacated targets. And I think one of the things that I thought that Kincaid would be a huge beneficiary of that, and there's no question about it, especially him being a former first-round pick, the talent that he has. But I think what I missed was, and it's so hard because you're trying to, it's like, is it a truth or a lie, right? It's the game that we're playing as we're listening to these coaches and executives and what they're saying. But they've been saying that everybody eats. That was their whole thing this whole offseason. That was their mantra. Everybody eats. And then I was saying okay, that's cute. Everybody eats. But then eventually, we'll see who actually does it. But it really has been. Even after acquiring Amari Cooper, they just been sharing the ball really across the board. There hasn't been one dominant player. And so as a result, I do agree with you. And that I think he is overvalued at this point. Now, it will be interesting if Joe Brady is taking head coaching interviews. If Joe Brady were to leave and you're starting off with a new offensive coordinator, that could drastically change the offensive approach. Because I think Kincaid might have been more involved in the offense when Ken Dorsey was the head coach or offensive coordinator, mind you, than Joe Brady. So that'll be an interesting development going forward. I don't think Joe Brady will end up leaving, but you never know. So, but overall, I agree with you right now. He's overvalued. Once Knox maybe is out of the picture, because I think that'll be coming up, they'll ask him to take a pay cut or they'll just flat out cut him coming up because his contract is overinflated. Maybe Kincaid gets more involved, but even still, I think they've seen a lot of success in this everybody eats mentality. I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, it's definitely, and like you said, I think the only thing that could possibly change it is if Joe Brady does take one of these, opportunities elsewhere and leaves the Bills and they get a, new offensive coordinator in there with possibly a different philosophy.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. All right, Joe, so I'm going to go with a zinger for my first pick here. It's going to be quarterback Jayden Daniels. Now I know I'm getting the tomatoes are getting ready to be thrown at me, so I'm prepared. But look, he was a quarterback 5 last year. He had a phenomenal rookie year. And you called it, Joe. Much better than Caleb Williams. 331 completions, 480 attempts, 3,568 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 9 picks. Great touchdown interception ratio for him. Had 148 attempts, 891 rushing yards, and 6 rushing touchdowns. So overall, you look at this, hey, how could you possibly not be thrilled about that? I mean, it's very reminiscent, honestly, to what Robert Griffin III did when he was a rookie, for the then Washington Redskins. Now with Jayden Daniels, he kind of had a real similar uplifting of the team, his performance, what he's been able to do, and probably a lot of leagues might have won because of Jayden Daniels, because of all that he did. But here's where it all kind of goes south for me. Right now, if you look at the trade chart, by the Draft Sharks here, he's third. Right, so he's behind Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and then it's Jayden Daniels. But you're talking about a point value at 42. Jalen Hurts, the next quarterback's at a 33, and Joe Burrow's at a 31, and Mahomes is at a 31. Now, I understand how good Jayden Daniels was, but there's a lot of things to consider. I mean, people were thinking, let's think about a guy like C.J. Stroud, right? C.J. Stroud, everybody was so enamored by him, rightfully so. He had one of the best rookie quarterback seasons of all time. All of a sudden, he drops like a rock. Now he's not even in the top 10 in some trade value charts. So it's like, okay, you got so hyped up by him in year one, and then he fell in year two. So are we experiencing recency bias here with Jayden Daniels and saying that, hey, he's the third best dynasty quarterback? I'd rather have him over Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. Would you? I wouldn't. So when it comes down to it, that's a concern. The second piece is, what's the weapons around him? He's been able to do a lot with a little, but Terry McLaurin is good, not great. I wouldn't say he's an alpha receiver. He's going to have 1 year left on his deal. And then in 2026, he's going to be 31 years old. When you get to that 32, 33 years old, that's when things start to fall off the wagon wheel when it comes to receivers. So who's he got to work with? You're going to have to rely on Dan Quinn, the head coach, and Adam Peters, the GM, to be able to get the right players in there to really help Daniels move forward. Can they do that? Yeah, I'm sure they could, but it's still a question. We don't know what's going to happen here. So that's something to consider. Other than that, who else do they got? Zach Ertz is aging. I don't even know how much time he has left. He's working with Olamide Zaccheaus, so he doesn't have a lot of options. And to boot, we've got possibly the offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, may no longer be the offensive coordinator for the Commanders. He's done very well with Daniels. If he goes to the Bears with Caleb Williams or somewhere else, you're talking about another offensive coordinator. How does Jayden Daniels do with a new playbook, new offensive, system? I'm not saying that it'll affect his long-term dynasty value forward. It maybe next year he has a setback like C.J. Stroud, but you just see the huge difference that Stroud has at the end of year one versus the end of year two. It's astronomical, the difference. So to me, I think it's a mistake to have him be, and that's why I call him overrated, because I would much rather have Hurts. I'd much rather have Burrow. Heck, would you rather have Mahomes? I know Mahomes had a really down year this past year, but before that, Mahomes has been, arguably, he was considered a top 3 dynasty quarterback, no questions asked. So it was 1 year, and all of a sudden we're like, no, Mahomes, we got to, he's plummeting. So that's my concerns.
Yeah, I hear your concerns. I would give me Jayden Daniels over all those guys you mentioned.
Why?
Because it's the running upside and what he's able to do. I mean,
he could get more injured too, though. You saw what he did in Arizona State. He was much more reckless, or not Arizona State. I'm sorry, he was at Arizona State, but more so when he was at LSU.
Yeah.
But he was reckless when it came to running the ball, and he could get himself hurt too.
He could, and I mean, he did suffer a rib injury earlier this year. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think as time goes on, he'll become smarter in his running style. But either way, like, he's so dynamic, and Burrow doesn't give you necessarily those. I mean, he does give you some rushing numbers, but not like Jayden Daniels. And I think that's what is the reason why Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson are so good and so valuable for fantasy is the rushing upside, the rushing touchdowns. And I know that puts Jalen Hurts in that category, but with Saquon Barkley, he's been getting less rushing touchdowns. Does that take away from him?
But you don't think that teams may, after having a full year of tape on them, you don't think that they'll adjust in year two? It happens all the time.
I get that, and I know that's what happened with C.J. Stroud, but the difference is Jayden Daniels is so mature and he's played so much college football, and everyone just says, like, he eats the stuff up. He's the first guy in the building at 5 a.m. Like, that's one thing that doesn't scare me if Cliff Kingsbury leaves, because his work ethic, I think he's just constantly in the ear of the offensive coordinator, whether it's Cliff or somebody else. He'll figure out the offense. He'll do it. And to the point of view, like, lack of weapons, I mean, he's doing it this year without really the weapons. And you mentioned, like, Lawrence is number one guy. They also be curious to see what they do. They have the third most cap season, or third most cap space heading into the season. They got $103 million in cap space. Are they able to net a receiver? Did they trade for a Tyreek Hill? Do they sign a T. Higgins perhaps? I mean, those things are, could be possibilities. And then I think you're looking at this Commander team a lot differently. But I think, I could see the reason why he's overrated, but maybe I'm buying into the hype. I really like Jayden Daniels, but I think he could continue. And I think because he's more athletic than CJ Stroud, and just has more ability, I don't know if he'll have that sophomore slump.
I guess it's a half full or a half empty glass person, because at the end of the day, we're looking at the same things, but looking at it from a different perspective. We'll see. I think he's overrated at the moment, but time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, it is wild, right? I mean, just after 1 year, he's automatically putting third, but I mean, I could see the argument for that.
So, Joe, who is your second most overrated dynasty asset?
I'm going to go with running back Kyren Williams. And, this is a guy I really like this year. Had him in a lot of different fantasy leagues. And, it's partially just how much the Rams utilize this guy. He had, for the first time, too, he's played pretty much a full season. They rested him week 17, but otherwise played a full season. He had 316 rushing attempts this past season, 228 the year before. He is coming off a really good year where he had 1,299 yards, 14 touchdowns, 3 lost fumbles. Just kind of interesting. He was definitely less efficient. He had more opportunities, but averaged 5 yards per carry the year before on less carries, but had 1,100 yards versus the 1,200 yards he had this year. But looking at his trade value, it's at 60. So he's ahead of guys like Devon Achane, Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, even a Josh Jacobs. So it's interesting where he's kind of placed, and a lot could change. What you're mentioning, changes that could happen in Washington, right? I think there's different changes that could happen with the Rams. They drafted Blake Corum. If Kyren Williams can't sustain this type of workload, I mean, he's got pretty much 95+% of that workload opportunity at the running back position. We also have seen when guys get over 300 carries, typically the next season they do get injured. So that could open up the door for Blake Corum there. Is McVay going to be the head coach, long term with the Rams? That obviously changes a lot of things. And Kyren Williams only has 1 year left on his deal too. And if he's not with the Rams, who use him like a workhorse back, there's no guarantee if he changes teams that they'll continue to use him in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, if tomorrow we heard a contract extension by the Rams for Kyren Williams, and we knew with certainty that Sean McVay was not going to retire because there's been rumblings that he would, I think, honestly, when Stafford is no longer there, I could definitely see that be his time to leave. I mean, he'd have to start all over with a quarterback process, which maybe he would enjoy. I mean, we've seen guys like Jayden Daniels. We just talked about him, right? He was able to do it. So it all kind of depends. But if you knew those two things, you feel a lot better. But those two things are not sure things. So I agree with you. I think I'd be nervous for Kyren Williams' dynasty value going forward. I think it's overrated right now. And I think if you wanted to, I think you could cash in and get a lot better, get more in return, honestly.
Yeah, coming off this season, I mean, he finished as the RB6, which was, really impressive. I know a lot of people had kind of were fading Kyren Williams, were nervous about Blake Corum, but I think just injury risk and from a workload standpoint, that I think if you ever wanted to move off of him and bank off of that RB6 performance, now would be the time to do that.
So my last player that I believe is the most, one of the most, not the most, but one of the most overrated dynasty assets, going to be wide receiver George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He ended up finishing as the wide receiver 42 on the season, 103 targets, 59 receptions, 900 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, Joe, I know you'd be very surprised that I'm saying him because I have been a big fan of his for quite some time, and I've been pounding the table. But this is where, maybe I'm ejecting too soon. I had, back in the day, I was a huge fan of Derrick Henry. He wasn't doing anything for the first few years. I was like, all right, I'm out. And all of a sudden, the next year, he just goes off. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So this could very well be the same thing. But, looking at his dynasty trade value, you're talking about him being ahead of the likes of T. Higgins, JSN, DK Metcalf, Devonta Smith. I just think that's, even guys like Lab McConkey, even Aroma Dunze, kind of uppercomers that to me, really excite me. I just don't get it. I understand he's very athletic. I understand that he can make these acrobatic catches. But the problem is I just don't see how a situation is going to change. At the end of the day, it probably is going to be Russell Wilson again. Russell Wilson and him have done okay, but they haven't done as great as I thought they would. I thought, based on what Russell Wilson was able to do with Cortland Sutton, I thought that we would see a better performance out of George Pickens. We really haven't seen it. Not to mention, he has ability of being temperamental. I mean, he's temperamental with the media. He's temperamental on the sideline. It seems to happen with Pittsburgh receivers. I don't know what it is, but eventually the Pittsburgh Steelers might say, enough is enough. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And usually when that happens, it hasn't really turned out all that well. Antonio Brown, Chase Claypool, Martavis Bryant, the story goes on, right? I mean, it's just a theme, that's
Possibly
happened.
Deontay Johnson too, depending on how things go for him.
Yeah, right. They've all kind of gotten to the point where it was just disgruntled, and they just said, "All right, enough with you," and then they just kind of dissolved. So, if I knew George Pickens was going to be in a high-powered offense and he was going to get a ton of targets, then I see the talent, I see the potential, and that's what I've been in this whole time. But we've seen it. He's been in the league for 3 years now. It's been a long time. So it's like, how much longer are you going to give the guy? And that's where, for me, that's where I feel at this point he's just too overrated. They have him over those other guys where they've proven way more, or they seem to have way more upside. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've not always been the biggest George Pickens fan, as you know, Steve. You've been much higher on him than me, but even I was thinking if there was ever a time for George Pickens to perform, it'd be this year with Russell Wilson, who just throws those moon balls, would just give him those chances because, Kenny Pickett wasn't necessarily doing that for George Pickens and whatever other quarterbacks they had wasn't pushing the ball down the field. So I knew Russell Wilson would be the one to do that. And just seeing to have this, disappointing performances with Russell Wilson and him giving them the opportunities down the field, and especially lately, them just not being on the same page. I also think George Pickens gets in his own way too. Like, I've never seen a wide receiver that's worse at body control and getting 2 feet in bounds. I mean, to the point where he had, touched the same foot down twice, which doesn't even count for a touchdown. He's had several catches and touchdowns taken away because he doesn't know how to, make his legs go limp and keep him in bounds. So that's part of it. And you mentioned the diva aspect. I don't know. Pittsburgh just ignores the personality issues. And even though they've been burned in the past, they just think they can deal with it. And then they only deal with it for so long. And like you said, they decide to move on. And who knows how much more they're going to be able to take of George Pickens and, his attitudes. And I think the concern too is, like you mentioned, like the quarterback position. I'm not so sure depending on the way the season's ended, I'm not so sure they do bring Russell Wilson back. And if they don't, what are they doing at the quarterback position?
The one possibility that you could say maybe there's a glimmer of hope is he will be a free agent after the year. So he has 1 year left. This is his time to prove it. He wants to get that contract. I don't think the Steelers would give him a contract extension. So if he does become a free agent, he can kind of go wherever he wants. That would be interesting. And I do want to mention, I don't want people to be confused based on this, based on, the title of the episode. Just because I think that George Pickens is overrated doesn't mean that I'm not interested in him. I do like him. I like Jayden Daniels. I'd be interested in acquiring him. It's just that perception, right? If people are saying that, oh, he's better than T. Higgins, he's better than JSN, he's better than Ladd McConkey, I'm like, is he? That's where it's like, okay, your value is just way off. And there's players like that. The value is just completely off. I just think that he's one of them. Do I still have interest in him? Do I think he has potential? Yes. But right now, the juice isn't worth the squeeze based on the potential that everybody says, like, oh, look at this potential. Look at this potential. It's like, yeah, I see it, but I'm not going to pay a premium for it anymore. If you want to give me his normal price or a slight discount, I'll take him, but I'm not going to pay a premium anymore.
Yeah, I agree. The potential word is dangerous in the dynasty realm because a player can only, like you're saying, the player can only have potential for so long to the point of like, you just got to say like, they're not going to hit it. And 3 years is usually a pretty good sample size. If you don't really see it happening by year 3, it just may not happen. And given all the different issues that the Steelers are having and the instability at the quarterback position that they have, it's going to be tough. And you're right. You're not wrong. Like those other players you mentioned, especially Ladd McConkey, who's, going to have the stability of the Chargers offense. He's going to be with Herbert. Much rather have that situation than even a younger, young talented player like Pickens. I would take Ladd McConkey all day.
100%. So that does it for this episode. We talked about a few players that Joe and I feel are the most overrated dynasty assets based on what happened in the 2024 season or just the overall perception of value for these players. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time.